Oh, welcome everyone back to 2025. Ready to kick off eRequesting new year. Um, so our agenda for today, I'm going to be the chair today. There'll be usual business, approval minutes and the like. And then Andy's going to run us through most of the session today, focusing on a number of different features that we've sort of identified in scope and for priority. So we've got task group, representing the sequence of audit tests, copy to, and my health record upload consent. And then also an update on pregnancy status. So we'll see how we go. There's a lot there, but we'll try and get through making some more decisions today. Just kicking into the usual business. So we've got the approval of the minutes. I sent those out earlier this week. So they here are the draft minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to have a look at them and identify any issues or anything with them. But the minutes are there. Would anyone like to motion to approve those?
I'll motion, Michael, Steph.
Okay, got Stefan motion. Do we have a second to motion?
I'd love to, but I wasn't at the meeting.
I'm happy to. Thomas Straitrockman.
Thomas, thank you. So I will launch a poll for the approval of these minutes. Hopefully you can see that.
I can't vote in this poll. It's weird.
Oh, major co-chair. So anyone who's a
Oh,
co-chair,
right.
so you can just put your votes in the chat if you're a co-chair, Andy, Angus, Steph.
Oh, sorry, I ended the poll because I was just trying to get it off my screen.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I was trying to close the window and it had this big button that said end poll. I was like, yeah, end poll.
Okay. Anyone who hasn't voted and would like to, can you just do it in the chat and we'll add those to the votes that we already had. If you already voted, that's fine. We'll keep those. But anyone else who hasn't, so just do that in the chat. But I can share the results now. So I think that should be sharing. So we had 19 affirmative plus the 2 in the chat. So that will be, oh, sorry, we've got 9 affirmative plus the 2 in the chat. So that's 11 affirmative. And we had 0 negative and 9 abstain. So that has passed. Shelley, did you get all those?
Yep, all good.
Great, excellent. All right. So moving on to action items. So this is, again, we're just keeping track of the action items as they come up, make sure we don't forget about them. We still have those ones for task business status and task code. There's still Confluence pages for that. We'll come back around to those at some stage. There's no priority on getting back to those. They're just there to remind us. There is another item there on the CDG and TDG to agree on the principles for inclusion criteria for maybe in scope. So we have agreed on the principles for inclusion, but this is more about, I think, really resolving issues that the TDG is bringing in that haven't gone through the CDG or don't have CDG guidance. So there is a harmonisation group being set up at the moment to work out how we deal with those issues between CDG and TDG. So I think we'll leave that action item there to see how the harmonisation group sets up to manage those. It's less about the maybe in scope. It's really more about having a harmonisation group for things that TDG wants to bring in. The maybe in scope items for R1. This is where we've changed, done a bit of a pivot now. The last couple of meetings, we were talking a lot about scope. was potentially going to go on for a long time. So we've changed the focus for this meeting now to be back on things we've already agreed on to be in scope and try and get some decisions and things back in the IG. I think we might take more of an iterative approach from now on about the additional scope items. We have discussed them. We can bring them in from meeting to meeting. So I think we will close that one. We're not going to specifically vote on those as they were originally presented. I think we'll just bring in the scope items more iterative, rather than trying to decide them all at once. So I think we'll close that. And then the last one was the confirming the AFMM level required for an STU, a standard for trial use, release of AU eRequesting. We originally said we were going to target an AFMM level 1. I think there was some confusion about whether we actually needed them at an AFMM level 2. Brett, I understand you have got some advice on this. Were you able to close this one out now?
Say that the question again.
The last action item here about the
Ah.
confirming the AFMM level
Yep.
for the
Yep,
STU.
yep. Yeah. So going around at the moment, we are just advising that when you publish a trial use specification, so a working standard trial use, you won't be allowed to include any draft 0 content. So that's anything that hasn't reached committee FMM1, right, which is agreement, and that's the only rule that will apply. So yeah, basically it has to the content has to be AFMM level 1 or above, which means basically the committee has agreed it's ostensibly complete.
Okay, that's good, thanks. And that's what
Yep.
we'd originally
Yep,
agreed as our target for the eRequesting TDG. We agreed that we'd target AFMM level 1. So that's no change then. We don't have to go to target. If we get some to an AFMM level 2, that's great, but it's not a requirement for us to publish. So we'll be able to close that one. Are there any other questions or comments on the outstanding action items? No. Keep moving then. So now this is just a general update. Given we're starting now 2025, this is sort of the plan for the year ahead. This is what we agreed to late last year as well as our target timeline. So we're looking at continuing the iterative development of AU requesting early in the year. Those yellow stars are connectathons. And the blues would be snapshots that we would take of the eRequesting IG for those connectathons. Also would look to maybe in June having some test events, dedicated test events where we can do some testing to make sure that the IG is fit for purpose, and aiming for a ballot for standard for trial use or working standard in August, with publication in early 2026. So we would go out for ballot in August. Through September, October, and November, we do the resolution, and then it's just the publication process over the end of the year with publication, early in 2026. So that's our current target. What does that mean? So we're looking 9 to 10 meetings now from January to May. We've got a March Connectathon. During May to June, we really need to solicit some pre-ballot comments and resolutions. So this was one of the options we had originally, was about going to a ballot for comment prior to going to the ballot for working standard. We decided we didn't want that because it was going to take too long. But we do run the risk that if we have too many issues coming up in the ballot, that we won't be able to publish it at the end of that ballot process. So the earlier we can get feedback prior to ballot, the better. So we'll need some mechanism to do that, to try and more broadly circulate the IG and try and get some comment and resolve any issues prior to going to the ballot for working standard. We'll look in June probably to have some Spark testing events and get our AFMM level 1 approvals. and then July will be publishing preparation approval with an August ballot. So we don't have a lot of time with these 9 to 10 meetings, so we do have to get through as much of the content as possible in the first part of the year. This is just an update on the ballot for comment. We've triaged all the issues. We've reconciled through the TDG all the issues except for one, which is one outstanding on pregnancy status, which we'll talk to at the end of this meeting if we get there. And the team is working hard in the background, applying these changes to the IG. So of our 36 issues that were to be applied, we've applied 30 of those. So they're still working through that. So you'll see the IG still changing with these issues coming through, being resolved and put into the IG. This was just a summary again of things we'd previously agreed. We previously agreed that these would be in scope for R1 around distribution list, service timing, request grouping, and My Health Record consent withdrawal. So there's some of the things we're going to talk about today around distribution list, copy to, grouping, task grouping, and My Health Record consent withdrawal. So we're going to pick those up and start working through the detail of those in this TDG. And that's probably where I hand over to Andy now to start walking us through those proposals. Would you like to share, Andy?
Not particularly. I'm too
Not
lazy.
particularly?
Happy to for you to, yeah, if you could just flip through them, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can do that. But if you want to share, just let me know. And we can jump to
Yep. So today, the idea is just to, I guess, get a wriggle on in terms of putting some candidate approaches up for things we've really spent a good long time talking around, particularly chosen a few that are hopefully not too controversial. I'd say that we would, we're looking at something that is that's usable as the foundation of some testing and trying these things out. There will certainly be refinements to this over time that we may look to do. We don't need to be, I think, concerned that this is perfect at this point in time, but we need something, and we need to get those somethings together and out as quickly as we can. So before we start this, does anyone have any burning questions that they just can't resist asking at this point before we jump in? Just no hands, good. Okay, so first one, task group. So this is something that we have talked about for a while. Just to kind of go back to the start of this, one of the obviously interesting things about the Australian environment is that by the nature of our policy and kind of regulatory settings, we clearly in pathology group a series of tests together when they're being ordered. And for us, it's a pretty fundamental part of the ordering process. And FHIR, on the other hand, really looks at the concept of single tests and associating them with single tasks associated with obviously fulfillment of that. We've talked, I think, for a while about tasks and the need for tasks. If anyone is still on the fence, unfortunately today you'll get lambasted with, oh, thanks, great question, task group or group task. Yes, I'm happy for that that change to occur, David. I'm not married to either. You'll get lambasted with tasks not only for here, but also I'll talk about tasks with communication as well. For me, tasks are pretty fundamental to clinical value. While we often talk about information transfer, really, if you're looking to deliver enhanced value, I think there's a strong argument to say that having the transparency of the the fulfillment of your obligations associated with the receipt and transfer of information is critically important. And from our perspective, in terms of diagnostic requests, you really do want to know when you make a request how it's being fulfilled. And this is absolutely the way that the tasks are being done. So the reason we're introducing group tasks is through practical experience. The center of fulfillment and the filler's role is really around those tasks and the fulfillment, and it helps a great deal in implementation if you can center in on the overarching tasks that represents the set of fulfillments that you are obligating yourself to perform. So this is why we introduce a group task or task group or parent task, however you want to call it. And the idea is it is an encompassing task that sits across all of the child tasks, so to speak. We define a relationship from a task to a service request through the focus attribute, and we define a relationship from a task to its parent or group through the concept of a part of. So the individual task is part of a larger group and the group task. And when you're doing searches, you can search for a group task and then through that pick up all of the children. You don't need to go and search for individual tasks, and it makes life a lot easier. Any questions so far? Excellent.
No, hang on. I guess.
Too quick.
Yeah, no, sorry. No, that's good. So the idea of the group task is that it's not really a task, it's just pointing at the tasks that it's got in its group. Or
no, it's exactly the opposite. The individual tasks point at the parent. So it doesn't point at the child tasks.
right. So it says I want to get dressed. It's not pointing at tie my shoes. It's saying I want to get dressed. And these are all the things I need to do.
But it doesn't know what it needs to do. All it knows is I represent the broader concept of getting dressed. There will be a bunch of things that are part of getting dressed, and they will all reference me as saying I am part of getting dressed. So when you pick it up, it is a little more complex to pick up the individual task because you have to do a reverse include to pick them up. But where it does give you value is that when you go out searching for new group tasks or new tasks that I need to fulfill, you can search for a group task rather than searching for every individual, because then if you've certainly got a subscription, you'll get pinged, every time there's a new child task. Whereas if you subscribe just to these group tasks, you'll actually get pinged on each new order, which is exactly what you would expect from a filler's perspective.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. We have previously talked about group service requests or service request groups as well. I'm leaving that aside a bit, and we're just going to the task one for the minute. So we've done the linking together.
Marvin, hang on, Marvin, you just got a shout in there, I think.
Oh, didn't see your hand.
That's all right. In fact, I was going to wait because I think he started to talk about what I was going to ask about, and to say, is this group task related in any way to the service request group concept? Or are they different?
Good question. And yes, it is. So you can kind of draw a line down the middle through focus in this thing and say the things on the left-hand side are, I can't remember, Heath, the way you refer to it, but it's like the definition of what is to be done. Whereas the thing on the right-hand side is really around fulfillment. So you can certainly have a definition that could end up having multiple options for fulfillment over its life. And so we make a distinguish here. There is potentially, and we've talked about before, a role with a group in the service request side as well. We're not going to cover that today because it does create some questions around where information sits, where some of the attributes sits. Do they sit in the group? Do they sit in the in the individual. And I think we will get up to that, but at the moment we'll just concentrate on the task side of it.
Cool, thanks.
I also mentioned here in that first bullet point about base, and in implementing this, I would highly recommend, as we've done with service requests and linking imaging and pathology through to a common abstract base, we will do the same thing with tasks. That a group task and an individual task both would actually reference a common base task profile that would never actually be instantiated on its own, but would be an abstract foundation for these fulfillment tasks, be they group or individual. I won't get into the technical side of doing that, but you will see it. If you all agree that this is a good idea, you will see it in the way it will manifest in an implementation guide. Distinguishing tasks. This is probably the only point of contention, and we can talk around this. There are a number of different ways. As I said, if you wanted to search for tasks that are of a variety group, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can in Fire specifically reference the profile that it's associated with. So if we have a group task profile, which we would have, you could actually say, I'm only interested in tasks that are for that profile. You could do a little bit of a cheat-ish, which is you could ask the file server and say, find me tasks that don't have a focus, because in my picture I've drawn here, the group task doesn't have a focus at the moment. That's not really probably a sustainable way if we introduce a focus for that. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. The third option, which Telstra Health and Magentis and others we've implemented, is to actually add a tag to the task resources to distinguish them, to give them a tag to say this is a fulfillment task or it's a group task. Probably those first two are both options there. The second one with direct profile reference is not, I'm not a fan of it because it hard codes the particular variety of the profile in there. But
I was going to comment, is profile mandatory? Must you have a profile populated?
well, that is a question, because you could create a valid task, a valid group task, which doesn't necessarily have the profile. But in terms of ensuring that validation can be performed, you do need the profile reference and your metadata. Otherwise, it won't be validated. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, do you want to, I think you mentioned earlier that the group task is predominantly there for searching or subscriptions. Is that the only, once you've got the group, you're then acting on the individual tasks? Would that be the right assumption?
You probably update the status of the group task.
Okay, so we might do status tracking in there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so we will over time, I think, become more sophisticated in how we manage service requests and their associated fulfillment to enable the individual elements of a group to have their own fulfillment lifecycle. So as you all know, fulfillment, one of the key attributes of a task is status, and status enables you to track the progression of fulfillment. So obviously the typical transition is requested, received, accepted, in progress, completed. You could also branch off into failed, or could be cancelled, or those kind of things. The question then is, how do you represent the whole order versus how do you represent the pieces of the order? And when at the moment, the way fulfillment is done is you don't get to pick and choose pieces of the order. you take the whole order. You might then, as a filler, decide to contact another filler to do part of the order. But I think, Angus, I'm accurate in saying that that kind of thing happens behind the facade of the filler. How they decide to fill it, whether they do everything themselves or go off to others to do that, it's kind of the pattern that is common in industry at the moment. So I would say and recommend that as we start this, that the status that is represented in the task should be populated, and it should be populated obviously by the filler, and it should be populated as a representation of the whole order filler status, fulfillment status. So you may, for instance, have some of the tasks that are not complete, and therefore you might mark the whole order as not complete. At the moment, the way the implementations, at least the Magentis one, works is we encourage all of the statuses to be consistent, but we do see a future where the individual tasks will begin to have their own life cycle of statuses, but we would still rely upon the filler to interpret across the whole set of task fulfillments to represent what happened, how you should regard the order.
So,
And I guess
so
given that this status for the group task is really only for the filler, it probably doesn't matter so much.
Well,
I'm thinking scenarios.
it's not only for the filler. You know, as a placer, and you're looking at the order that you created, you know, you've kind of got two levels of interest. One is I created the order, and at first glance, what's the status of the order? Do you really want to go through each individual piece and go, well, this one's completed, this one's not? You kind of want this this top level. Well, what's the status of the order I made? You know, in the way we don't do it yet. I don't know if you guys do, but you would see kind of a future where, look, I actually want to dig in and see the individual pieces and what was happening to them. But I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that in Australia, these things happen in effect as groups. Like the orders are made as groups of tests in pathology. So there is a really kind of concrete role for that group. So it's not just for the filler to fill in and use themselves. It's actually part of the communication that goes back to the placer, how the placer wants to interpret it. Do they want to ignore the group task status and only and make their own interpretation of tasks? Again, I think we maybe get there, but we kind of need, I think, to at least at the start be cognizant of the fact that both sets of statuses are actually going to be in play.
So I guess it's I guess the thing that's running through my mind is how we standardize on that across the ecosystem, because you know, if we get a bunch of orders, a bunch of tests that come through, and maybe one of them is a send away, and we can fulfill all the other ones and mark those as complete, but then the send away may take, you know, a few weeks to come back, and then, you know, as long as as long as everybody agrees on what that status looks like, then I think we're okay.
I think it works for that scenario, Marvin, because so group task is a roll up. So in the scenario you just talked about, I can imagine, say you've got 2 tests and one you do, and that Ebola you send off to some other lab. You would have, there's 3 statuses going on: the group status, the full blood count status, and the Ebola, right? And so your full blood count you do like within a few hours, and you mark it as complete. Your group status might still be in progress, because the group is still in progress, but this one is complete, and your Ebola is still in progress, right? And then eventually when that lab 3 weeks later comes back with your Ebola result, then you say your Ebola is now complete and your task group is now complete.
Yeah.
so that's how I see it working. And I'll say from Sonic's point of view with Magentis, we just align them all, right? Like we just we don't individually diverge the statuses. We actually just treat it as one status for the whole group. Everything is in progress, and then eventually everything is complete, even though one of those tests you might have got 2 weeks ago. So, and that's just our own complications about trying to be that granular. Status is very difficult, but that works as well, you know.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to have to come up with a really complex rules engine to define what the group task status was based on, you know, what was going on down below.
I think
we'd leave that up to the interpretation of
Yeah.
the filler for how they
Yeah.
wish to do it. I think we'll eventually, with experience, you know, constrain the domain of options that we do want to support, and then I think we can think about creating more constraints around the obligation. And as you say, you could get to the point of actually imposing a constraint on the value of the status so that it meets obligations associated with its children. But I guess at the moment, I think we leave it a little more relaxed until we get the you know, the experience under our belt. I would say though that this does not constrain you in terms of reporting. You know, we're obviously just doing requesting at the moment, but see, if you've all read ahead, then you know that, you know, the standard kind of fire way of linking diagnostic reports into this is linking them through the task output. So you could at any stage, as a filler, link a report into a task output, and you could do that on an individual basis and as well as doing it on a group basis. So in theory, I don't think there's any constraint that you could have a report, an early report, which the group status is still in progress, but you link in a diagnostic report into that as you gain it. So you don't have to only report necessarily when they're all completed.
I don't think you put any rules around it either. There's even the possibility that the children tasks are all completed, but the group's still in progress. And that might be because you're doing an add-on test yourselves that wasn't part of the original order. Now, I'm not saying do that, but like, why can't you do that as well? I think there's no rules around them. There's just your business doing what makes sense for you.
David?
So I'm confirming the language and everything. So I've requested, I want a pathology report, or I've got a pathology, I need to get some pathology done. So it's my service request. And if there's 3 things in there that I need done, then I guess that's 3 tasks. And in order to complete each one of those tasks, there's a bunch of group tasks that go through its life cycle. And when they're finished, the task is done. Is that correct?
One group task for the 3 child tasks.
Well, so because it's the whole request, whole request?
It's the
Okay.
whole fulfillment. So you're saying my fulfillment as represented by this group constitutes 3 pieces, and those pieces are linked to me as the parent, and then I go through them and discover the pieces that make it up.
Sure. Thanks.
David, too, there's 1 service request per test as well. So if you've ordered 3 tests, there's 3 service requests, and there's a task for each of those service requests, and then the group is grouping those together as the order, as well as the place of group number, which we've got in there. The place of group number is the same, so we've already put that in there, and they'll all have the same place of group number. This is just another mechanism to access that group through the group task.
And we started out life without a group task, and we just did it with the tasks, the individual tasks. So one-to-one relationship, each test, each task. And the problem we have is it introduces a bunch of overhead, because you know, if you're subscribing to new orders, you actually have to subscribe to each individual test. And we have in production examples of clinicians ordering 40 plus tests, and then you'd get pinged 40 times for every individual one that's coming through. And it's introduced huge overhead. By having this common group task that they all reference to, we can use that as the center of discovery. And it kind of mimics the standard operating model for the way things are done on a group by group, order by order basis within the Australian kind of ecosystem.
There's a hand up from Barty.
Hi. So when the status of these tasks or task group gets updated, will the filler be updating the task group and individual tasks, or how is it going to work? Like, or will it be individual tasks that will be updated as per the status, and the group task needs to be derived by the ordering system?
Yeah, so all of the statuses are updated by the filler for both the individual and the group, and they need to come up with an appropriate way of translating the set of individual task statuses into an overarching group status. However they want to do it, as Angus said, we at the moment are not being prescriptive. So for some implementations, they maintain currency across all of them, so they all move in lockstep. For others, there may be different individual tasks, and then it's up to the filler to then say, I want the placer to interpret the set of individual task statuses according to this status. So the logical one is to say, if you've got kind of 2 completed and 1 in progress, what you might say is, I'm going to make the group in progress status, and they would update that.
Okay, as long as there is a clear outline, as in they take the responsibility of both the set of tasks and
Yep.
Thank you.
Everything, and that's why I guess before we've always talked about tasks and fulfillment as being the center of the universe for a filler, whereas for a placer, their world starts with requests and managing the requests, and it's then that marriage that is, marriage is probably the wrong word, because it's actually something that can be relatively dynamic in terms of especially when we get around to like transfer and claiming and stuff, that we can create an order specification, and then we decide what we want to do with it. You know, do we want to give it to someone to do? Do we want to make it available to anyone to do? Those kind of things. So we're trying to, I guess, create a way of doing this that's a little more flexible when it comes to what the interpretation of policy is around this. That, you know, if you've kind of followed the HIE bouncing ball, it's the consumer mediated exchange, where, you know, there is in between this a role of the linking which occurs through that patient activity.
Yep. Thanks, Ed.
Any other questions? Does anyone think like task group is not a good idea?
Well, I wouldn't say it wasn't a good idea, but I guess it's the language, right? And I guess where I'm sort of used to dealing with tasks, you know, that's such a key word, isn't it? Task. And so we're all given these tasks. In order to complete a task, I have to do these actions. I guess that's the way I look at it. And then that task, actually, it's part of a bigger activity. Now, I had a look I think I looked up activity, and that's a whole workflow part of FHIR. So I was sort of like going, ooh, I need to stay away from that for a little while. But I guess in terms of those languages, that's what I was thinking. Heath?
So task is extremely generic, and I think that it can be easily hung up on by thinking about it as a task. And in this particular case, what we're actually talking about is a special type of task, which is about the fulfillment. So it is the fulfillment task, or more specifically, it's the fulfillment request. And the workflow, you're right, it is all about workflow. It's the workflow associated with fulfillment. Where is this request up to? from a fulfillment perspective. So it is a bit of a language issue, and yes, the language or the term used in VAR of task is task, and there's no avoiding that. But when we think about tasks in this context, we really should be thinking about it as a fulfillment task and its workflow. So yes, tasks can be used for tracking all the other things associated with this, but what we're actually doing here is tracking the fulfillment of the request using this task.
And this will come back to be a common pattern for requests. So you could see the same thing being used for medication requests, communication requests, all sorts of things where you're interested in, did this get done? And if it is in the process of being done, what's the staging of it? And it's really, really useful because we already do this with, for instance, acknowledgements. So, you look at the standard kind of set of technical acknowledgements, clinical acknowledgements, etc. It's all about did you receive it and where are you up to in that receipt? And it's for those who come into healthcare, I think you soon realize the absolute need for this kind of validation and transparency, because clinical handover, safety, risk, liability, they're all kind of needing this as a foundation. Any other questions?
On
Thanks.
that being a fulfillment task, with you talking about your common task base there with individual fulfillment tasks, do you think we would have a fulfillment task base or just a generic task base if there was other types of tasks that come up in the future?
At the moment, fulfillment.
Yeah, so
You could then have fulfillment task base dependent upon a task base, but I haven't found the need at the moment.
no, but we would be looking here as part of this implementation we're talking about now would be a fulfillment task base with then a fulfillment task and a fulfillment task group deriving from this.
Well, even more than that at the moment, but yes.
Can I, without putting my hand up, can I just, the question was asked, is there any problems with the idea of a group task? Without considering probably what is the next topic, which is grouping of service requests. I feel that that question is a little bit hard to answer, because my opinion is that we don't need both we need a grouping of something, but I'm kind of a little bit worried that we're looking at potentially grouping both service requests and the tasks. And I'm not against it. I feel that it's a little bit superfluous to do grouping of both.
So I think that's a valid concern, and that's one of the reasons why we're not doing service request groups next. There is a broader, I think, discussion around service requests. What we are going to talk about is what we did talk about, the Connectathon, which is the sequencing of service requests. And I think there is a question mark over how much and what the purpose of that service request group should be and could be. So that's noted, and I think it will be part of that discussion.
Okay, so you're not focusing on grouping of service requests, you're going to focus on sequencing of service requests.
At present, because that's an immediate need, the group task, we have an immediate need in terms of implementation. The practicality is we need something to hold the fulfillment of the group for discovery purposes, because there isn't an easy way otherwise, and a effective, scalable way when there is very large sets of tasks being ordered or service request tests being ordered together. Nairi.
Hi, Andy. This is a really good conversation, and I liked the reference that you made before about, because I was going to ask whether it was just for pathology, radiology service requests, or is it going to be more generalized in the pattern of what you're putting, what you're envisaging. But you mentioned that if, for example, the task, one of the child tasks is being handed off to another entity, for example, that is still needs to be completed and it's being performed by another organization, are you going to be tracking that status then? Is there going to be another sub-status within? I mean, I know that the group would be still, for example, in progress. There would be, the fulfiller would be still updating that to, in progress, but that downstream pattern that you're going to be putting in place, if we're talking that this is going to occur beyond radiology and pathology, there might be other use cases there that it could just be getting a little bit confusing, I think, if we don't think through how that's going to be managed. But maybe I've got the wrong idea about the use of that for implementation.
I'll have a go at that, Andy. I see this, what you do in the back end, like I'm then sending this task to someone else to do it.
Yep.
Is transparent to the first person who's asked you, right? So you might have to manage some tasks being sent behind you. Now you might be doing that completely manually. You might replicate this whole ordering model and repeat it behind your wall with another lab, right? And then that lab, when it returns back the one task you sent to them, and they come back and say it's complete, and then you've done whatever work you need to do in your laboratory to issue the report, you then mark the first task as complete, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So this, you could use this pattern in the back end, but I'd also highlight we're not focused on interlab. We're not necessarily trying to design a system for interlabs. It could be used for interlabs.
Yeah.
But as soon as we open up the door saying, yeah, this is for interlabs as well, we're going to get a whole lot of new scope. So whilst I can foresee how you could use this interlabs, we're not really trying to tackle that. And these star statuses are really just for that first request. How you update them's up to you, whether you're doing it manually, that send away is a manual process, whether it's automated somehow. When that lab returns the send away back to you, you have to update the task to the first person and say, hey, it's complete, or it's still pending.
But are we, thanks Angus, are we considering these for use outside of radiology and pathology? Did I hear that correctly?
I think we're trying to design a model that could be yes is the answer. That gets difficult because then it's suddenly like the scope is everything. But we are trying to come up with a task requesting model that we hope is repeatable for Meals on Wheels or farm, other things. But of course there'll be when you get to those other things, of course, it may dawn on you that there's something else, but we are trying to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thomas?
Malcolm, maybe. Marvin, sorry.
Oh,
I
Marvin.
guess surname Marvin.
Thomas's hand was up. I
apologize.
Maybe Nairi's question was answered and answered his as well. I don't know. This is going back to Heath's question about the service request. And I probably don't want to labor on it because I think we're looking at tasks now rather than service requests. But for me, I think service request groups or a group service request is a concept I would like to consider. I think there's some value in doing that. Now, it will be interesting to see how we divvy up what goes in what and what we think is duplicated across both of them. But I think that service request group is a concept we've been looking at and kind of moving forward with a bit. And I'd be interested to see that it doesn't take too long to come back up.
Noted. And yes, agreed. I think I'll go, Angus.
There you go.
I was going to say, Thomas, I think your hand is up.
Oh.
It is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, that's good. That's what didn't work before I took my hand down, but couldn't make a noise. I have two things to query, and I apologize for talking more about service request groups, but it does strike me somewhat that we seem to have this idea that a task is sort of underpinned by a request, and so perhaps a group task to some degree needs to be underpinned by a group service request. And I certainly know that when you're, as an orderer, when you're ordering this collection of things, whether they be multiple imaging things or multiple pathology things, the systems we use as orderers are going to represent those things, have a representation of the grouping that those things are ordered as. And again, that's, as we pointed out before, a really big part of the way things work in the Australian system. So perhaps the conversations are, unfortunately, a bit linked. The other thought I had about, and I think whether it is a task group or a group task kind of actually somewhat depends on whether there is also a service request group or not. Because if this object is a group, then sure, you can group things however you like. But if it is a task, which is a task that involves doing many other things, then perhaps it needs a request to go with it. And the third thought is just to clarify, can a task be part of many different groups? Because I can imagine a situation where perhaps I am in a hospital and I trigger a whole bunch of tasks that are grouped, for example, in relation to a stroke protocol. And then some of those tasks go to the lab and they are grouped because they form one pathology order. I'll make a few comments. Sorry, unless you want to go first, Andy.
No.
So, well, I think that the decision we have, the only decision we have to make at this stage is, would we use group service request instead of group task, right? Like I can see a big question mark whether we bring in group service requests. So we have a group task and then we add a group service request, and then group task points its focus to the group service request, right? That's a question mark whether we do that. But if we're going to do that, then like starting at group for complexity is, let's start, eat the elephant slowly and start at group task and then come around and have the big discussion about group service request. And I think the only decision we need to make at this point is there a world where we don't have a group task because we have just a group service request? And then are we wasting our time talking about group task? Right? So I see that decision point glaringly a bit here. Like, is there a world where we only have a group service request? To your point about higher levels above the group, I think is what you're saying. So as some sort of protocol, you've look, if you have to do like 10 different pathology tests in one request, then that's all just part of the group, right? So you'd have 10 tasks, 10 service requests and one group. But if you're talking about, there's some protocol that says I need this pathology request today, and I need another one in 5 hours and another one tomorrow with different sets, then that's sort of a plan definition, that's higher level thing, which would just be ordering up 5 different group tasks. There's the one to be done today, the one to be done tomorrow, the one to be done next week. And that's all achievable, like group tasks can have parents above it, but out of our scope at this stage is kind of how I look at
it. There is a broader discussion to have. I would come back to, and Angus, you'll have to close your ears on this, but there is, ultimately a distinction we're making here between the service definition and the fulfillment of that service. And it may be we have no fulfillment because it's an undirected service. It's just a definition of a set of tests to be done. And therefore, without this kind of separate universe of the service request, independent of the fulfillment, you kind of you can't maintain that separation between what I want done and who I want to do it, which may occur at different stages. The other thing I noticed that the grouping here, you always have an innate group simply determined by the group identifier that is shared across these resources anyway. So the problem comes really in a practical implementation. Reality is with searching and creation, how you do it is just how do you make this tractable in terms of its implementation. Mapping it into what the user sees is another part of the puzzle, but we are not going to lose, to Marvin, we're not going to lose this discussion around service request groups and what we do with it. We're kind of just trying to get over the hump with the group task as a starting point, and it gives a world of fulfillment, relatively a complete definition from a discovery and use perspective, and we will subsequently have a discussion around the groups of the other part and how we represent them.
Totally valid. You go and say, look, let's do this service request first, right? And then we'll worry about whether I need to call multiple service requests, or because to me, it almost sounds like grouping service requests is almost tying you down. Like, oh, that group doesn't work for me. I have to create my own group. So at least here
there is already a group. The group already service request groups already exist. It's just it's not a resource. Service request groups exist because service requests within the same group share a common identifier. So you can always, if you've got a service request, you can always find the rest of them in the group just by asking for all the other service requests with this identifier, because that's defined. It comes to, does it have to be actually a separate file resource from an implementation perspective? And that's a, you've got to be careful here to distinguish the logical need from the technical implementation, because there are ways of certainly using service requests and groups just with this approach.
Andy, on that point, that's where you started, right, with tasks. So you didn't have the group task, and then you had implementation issues with that, and so it added the resource for group task.
Yeah.
So I think that's the approach we're looking at here. There was a very good reason you had to do that, but you started off because you can find all the tasks without having the group task, right? But there were some implementation reasons that you identified that this was a better approach.
Is it worth it sharing what that reason was? Probably at Angus or Andy, but
so Andy said it a few times, but one is the notifications. So
yeah.
when an order is placed, I don't really need a notification for every single item on the order. I just want one notification, say there is a new request. It can have 10 tests on it. So that was one, not being spammed by notifications for every group. The other one is, and this was really just my implementation, the way I went about it, is I made a request to get all my group tasks, which gave me a nice list to then iterate through and say, right, I'm going to process this first group. Yes, it all was successful, sent into my lab, process the next one. And that just made, from writing, for me at least, in writing the software, it was very difficult to, let's say there's a backlog of orders, right? There's 100 groups waiting to be picked up by me. It's very difficult. I found it difficult to consume 100 orders, process each of those orders without having an error. Because if I had an error on the 50th order, I'm like throwing an exception. And now I'm like, oh my God, like, did I process one order? Did I process 10? Did I process 50? So by having this group, I was able to like chew away. I can get the list of pending orders, the group tasks, and just read them in and then work through them one at a time. I'm going to process this one, success. Process the next one, success. Process the next one, success. So it was very useful in that sense too. So that were probably the two main reasons.
Yeah, and I think my history of that was, initially at least, was the subscription notification part of it.
Yeah.
And so that you're only getting basically one notification for the group. And I guess, again, for the benefit of the others, that from a filler's perspective, they are interested in the fulfillment part of the request, not the actual service request themselves, i.e. the fulfillment task. And that's why they're actually getting notifications on task more so than they're getting notifications on service requests, because of the assignment, effectively, the potential assignment of something to an individual organization. Which was Angus's scenario. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context on why we're actually talking more so around the task group than we are perhaps the service request group. But again, it was a good point that Andy made around that we have grouping, but it's kind of an implicit grouping through identifiers more so of the service requests being the requisition identifier.
Any other commentary?
I was just going to make the comment that whilst I question, like, do we need group tasks? Do we just need a group service group? I think we do need a group task, because we know of some implementations of this already in the wild, and that being Telstra Health has one, we have one. And there is this difference between them, that we know Telstra Health is using a group service request, but they also use a group task, right? So we're all using a group task. So that's common amongst the implementations that exist. What's not common is the group service request. So I think it is right for us to start with group tasks, because it seems that people who are really actually doing this all have a group task, right? Where there is conjecture is the service request. So I think it makes sense to start here. We're going to have this conversation, but we've got our eye on group service requests, and then we're going to have a big conversation about group service requests.
Larry.
Sorry, just one more question. So children tasks can be completely independent of group tasks. There is no mandatory requirement around them being associated with a group task unless it's with a service request. Is that where we can have individualized tasks per service request?
You must have an individual task with a service request.
But they don't have to be, not all tasks need to be assigned to a group, right? There's no mandatory requirement around that.
I would say there is, yeah.
Because
there is.
when you order, so we had this debate early on. What happens if there's only one test?
One task, yeah.
Do I have to create a group? The problem of creating an exception with the one is it just makes it so much harder to process, because now you've got one or n and you've got to treat them differently. Whereas if everything is the same, even one task has a group task, then it's consistent, no matter if you got 1 or 100, same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Remember too that.
Yeah.
Remember too, that's on the wire. Like, that's when you're dealing with the external system you're trying to send the order to, right? Internally, when you're in your own hospital doing your own stuff, you can do whatever you like.
You can manage
right?
them. Yeah. Which sort of answers Thomas's question before, right? You know, like if you've got a request for a protocol for stroke, you've got a way of managing that in a system that has both a localized application, but also the requesting and fulfillment process side of it as well.
And there is a way of externalizing those kind of protocols as well, but that's not this. There is much more complex grouping and sequencing structures and FHIR to support those kind of things, but it's not something we've kind of bitten off.
And on that point, because some people might be looking at the resources that are available in FHIR, and there's a resource called request group, and you're probably like, there's a request group resource. Shouldn't we be using that? So go read that request group resource. We have considered it deeply, and we are of the opinion that it is not fitting it's not even close to the use case of this. It is very much in that protocoling scenario where you are creating a plan definition for some disease that needs this plan, and part of that plan would be this group of requests that would be done. It's not about the instance of an order. It's about the definition of a set of orders is what request group in Fire is about.
Okay.
So happy people to go read that, but people might sort of be thinking in their mind, why aren't they talking about request group? There's a resource called request group.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
In fact, there isn't any more in R5. They changed the name because of this issue.
confusing.
It's now
Yeah.
called request orchestration, which
Yeah, which is a
actually
better
better reflects what it actually is
Yes,
doing.
it
It
does.
is about conditions and things like that that are related back to protocols. So it's more around order sets and stuff like that.
All right, next slide.
We're
Got
looking
through
at
one.
making
Got
any.
through one.
Do you want to? Are we looking at making any decisions in this meeting, or
Well, I can't remember what the next slide is,
I think
and I don't know
the-
whether it's about group request. No, so
No.
back. So I guess the question I'd like to put everyone is, can we do a poll to say, yes, let's add this for now and try it out. And I've got an implementation of it that I will put up into the IG, and we can run it through in a subsequent meeting. But I guess I'd say, does everyone agree that we can progress with the task group at present? And this is not saying I'm locking down all things, because we certainly haven't. The whole point of this wasn't to go through every attribute of the task and determine whether it was relevant to group or not. But this gives us a way forward of saying, yep, significant interest. We've got implementation experience in this. Let's put a prototype version up into our IG as something we can use and test out within connectathons, etc. Moving forward.
So to reiterate that, Andy, is this, so you're proposing that we put in a draft task group into the IG based on these principles on this slide, and that's what we'd be voting on?
I think we're just voting, yes, we're going to go down the fork in the road and deep dive into group tasks, as opposed to, no, this is a silly idea, we shouldn't do it.
I
Well, not only are we going to go down, we're going to actually do it. We're going to create something in the IG so we can test it.
Yeah. So that was my understanding of what you'd said, Andy. Yeah, that this what you're proposing is to implement a draft of task group based on these principles. When we weren't going to go through every single element, you were going to use something put in there, and we can use that for comment. Is that?
Yes.
If that's clear, does someone want to second that?
I'll second that, Marvin.
Okay, I will launch a poll. Anyone that's co-chair of the meeting just needs to put it in the comments. Andy, Angus, Steph.
Yep.
Okay. Looks like those numbers stabilizing. I'll just give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll end that. So sharing that, we've got 23 affirmative plus 3 in the comments. So that's 26 affirmative, 0 negative, and 6 abstain. Did you get all that, Shelley?
All good.
All good. Great. Excellent. Well done, everyone. That was a good topic. Given we've got 20 minutes, you happy to just keep going in order, Andy, or is there any you want to jump ahead? Or
I'm hoping this one should be,
yeah,
as long as we don't go down service requesting groups. This one should be pretty straightforward. So for those of you who had the opportunity to be at the Connectathon, where were we? Melbourne. Last time we had a good conversation around a practical implementation need, which was given a set of tests within a order, how do we represent the sequencing of those? Because within Fire, the sequence is not explicit. And the use case, Angus, you want to talk about the need? Because it's really from
Yep.
your perspective.
Yeah, so when we went live with this was the first complaint we got from collectors, right? So because the way Fire works, unlike existing HL7 version 2 messaging, there is no implicit sequence to the items being ordered. So the doctor might order 5 pathology tests, and the structure that Fire provides us doesn't actually have any way of there being any order as to, does the full blood count come first, then the liver function, then the UNE? And I will say, we're not talking about we want you to perform them in this order. We're literally just talking about how to represent it on a screen. So the problem we had was people were coming into with their barcode and a request form. And they'd scan the barcode and the order would come up on the pathology collection screen. Yet they'd also had this paper rendition of the order. And the collection staff, the phlebotomists, being very prudent about their job, they would sit there and compare the paper order with what was on their screen, just being very thorough about what are they collecting, right? And they would go down the list. They'd go look on the paper form and go full blood count, look at the screen, full blood count, liver function, UNE. But the problem was that the electronic, because it had no way to represent any sort of order, the orders would be different. Now, when these orders we started getting larger, like 8 tests, 10 tests, God forbid, in specialist pathology, we've seen 43 tests. So if the orders are jumbled between the printed form and the screen, it was a very high cognitive load for them. It was like trying to find the needle in the haystack to check whether the form aligned with the paper, with the electronic screen. Was there a test missing on one of them? So they're trying to do their job properly, and we're just making it really difficult for them because the orders weren't aligned. And that's all this is about.
So the good that David Hickok's here, because he can listen to this, which is the coexistence of the paper and the digital is an issue it creates challenges, and one of these is when the paper is used as, in effect, the token that carries the linking information between the request that was made and the fulfillment. This representation on the paper, you've got to reconcile it, and there could be a whole bunch of different information potentially. So choosing the appropriate and safe way of the right stuff being entered into the collection system is an ongoing challenge in this. So this is one fix that if we went to pure digital universe, this issue might go away. Again, this is something though that is just a practical kind of need in an implementation, and it's a relatively straightforward thing to do. So we are saying here that we could do this simply by having a relative sequencing number. So the typical one would be you would number one test 1, the next one 2, 3, 4, etc. That's pretty straightforward. However, I mean, you could just go 1, 1, 2, 2. I don't know if we really need to be prescriptive about each number has to be unique, etc. So this just gives the filler and the collection center a deterministic way of rendering this information if they so need it, and that would represent the sequence with which it was created on paper form at the place.
I was expecting that the paper would be simply a rendition of the digital. So, whatever's on we're not going to add information in the paper form. I expect people are going to try and scribble stuff on it, but
yeah, say that.
Yeah. But even things like the sequencing information is actually on the paper form. It's just hidden, and we have no way of carrying that in Fire at the moment, because just the way the interrelationships between the service requests exist. So this is just a way of making sure that the inherent information that's on the paper has actually an explicit representation in the Fire.
Angus, do you think this is a point in time transition problem of the phlebotomists, cross-checking between the digital and the paper? Or do you think this is something that's going to sort of settle down over time and people will start to trust the digital more?
Yeah, I think it will be ongoing. I mean, we've had V2 messaging orders for eons, and this problem and I guess the problem doesn't exist there because just inherently you get an order in a V2 message. But we've had that for a long time, and people are still doing this. I struggle a little with, you know, we live in a world today where you can manually collect a pathology order, and radiology is probably no different if all your systems are down. Like you don't have internet access. You know, there's, God forbid, but we today have fallback, right? Like the barcode didn't scan, my scanner's broken, my internet's down at my collection center. We don't tell patients to go away and come back tomorrow because of these problems. We fall back to the paper form, we fall back to some rendition they give us. So yeah, I struggle. I'd like to see the paper disappear, but I struggle with how that would happen. And as long as that other representation lives in the ecosystem, you're always going to have this aligning the two in a sequence problem, right? I also think it's a fairly easy thing to fix. You know, we can, we'll talk through this, but I don't think it's hard for anyone to add. It solves the problem. And if paper disappears in the future, it doesn't matter that we have a sequence. It may still be useful. So when someone's communicating to the doctor, looking at the order in his ordering system, the order is equal to the electronic order the path person might be looking at in their system. So even without paper in the system, there's still a use case for consistent sequencing for each party, I think. There's a lot of hands up.
Yep, I think it's in order. Thomas might be first.
Yeah, cheers. I've got a couple of comments on the Confluence page for this. I think it's really an idea. I think it just from a clinician's point of view, I do actually expect to see the tests represented in the order that I put them in, and it'd be really weird to see like hepatitis C serology before full blood picture in a list. It just like wouldn't make sense to me. I'd never order it that way. I think it's just important to make it really explicit in this extension that this is about display order and nothing else, and that would be good.
Yep, we'll certainly note that that's the purpose.
I agree.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, that's where I was sort of looking too, because when I see a sequence of tests, that to me is implying you have to do them in this order. So in terms of the labels we use, right, it's more of a display order than anything else, I thought.
Yeah,
I think
it's ultimately just going to represent the order, the sequence with which they were created and represented on the paper. You know,
yeah, sure, no,
as I said
absolutely.
before, at the end of the day, the only point of it is to carry the inherent metadata that's in the paper around that sequencing.
Yeah, definitely, and that's why I guess I'm going with display order, and I'd stay away from 1111. I don't know what they're all number one.
You're just saying we haven't determined any order.
There'll
Okay,
be no
sweet.
rule to stop you doing that.
Yeah,
but
there'll be no
it doesn't make
validation.
sense. Yeah.
Well, Michael did raise the issue, why would you allow it? And the thing is, yes, you could mandate that each number has to be unique, but that would be, maybe others know, but
I
creating
was
that.
thinking, yeah, no, I was thinking that the service itself would assign the display order based on the receipt of the data, so the person didn't even have to think about it.
So the
Anyway.
placer of the order is defining a sequence by just the sheer order they order them in.
Yeah.
I think the reason 1111 is there is because we don't want to create the complexity for people where you had 1, 2, 3, and then someone's deleted 2 and added another 1, and now you've got to go around and update all the sequences in all the tasks. Like you can just, you could go 100, 200, 300, right? And then if they add 1, you can go 101, 200, 300. It's just the flexibility, right? Because from a developer's point of view on our side, it's nothing more than order by number, right? Now, if the placer gave me an order of 111, Well, it's on their head, right? I'm just going to call the function that says order by sequence, and it's just going to randomly put them in some random order, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? Now, if people ring me up and say, your system's broken, it's putting it in some random order, I'm going to look at the data and go, well, you're sending me 1, 1, 1, right? Like, you're not giving me an order. Like, just give me an order, I'll do it. But it gives them the flexibility to manage that order in a flexible way.
Heath.
I am sorry in advance, Andy, for making what you think is simple to make it perhaps more complex. I'm just going to reflect a conversation that I had after the Connectathon session on this topic. And there was basically the suggestion was, why not just use the placer order number with an accession number at the end of it? So effectively a combined group number with an accession number rather than coming up with an extension. So I'm really just putting it out there as a possible alternate solution to this. Now I don't know whether to get a decision out of today, whether we just say there is a need for this requirement and then we work out what is the solution at another date. But I just wanted to basically put that as an alternative and to see what the group thinks about this, because I know we certainly had some robust discussion about placer order numbers and things like that previously when we did the first set of waves around this, and it was excluded from the profile. But it just seems like a more native way of solving the problem more so than having an extension.
And can I add to that, because it's the same theme, that there's a comment in Confluence from Vince McCauley that says, can this be achieved without an extension? For example, using an incrementing ID as happens in HL7 version 2. Extensions may be well controlled, but are complex. So it's kind of on the theme he's talking.
Yeah, and that's basically a very good summary of what was discussed at the Connectathon.
And just to put on my computer science hat, overloading identifiers with additional semantics other than uniqueness is normally a really bad idea. And that would be my aversion to doing it that way. And if you set a precedent of allowing, of overlaying ordering, then do you start to then set a precedence of being able to pull apart identifiers and then have additional meaning associated with elements of an identifier? It's just kind of a slippery slope to get on that. And that's kind of my 5 cents.
And that was an expected response.
Barty.
I hear you what you say, Andy, but this was a similar problem that we have tried to resolve on our end. And we are using sequence code type in identifier, and we define the sequence, and along with the requisition ID and identifier, in individual service request, it becomes a unique identifier, which gives you a sequence and obviously the parent order number as well there.
So is that to say that you've defined another type of identifier which you've defined as a sequence? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So it would just, so the requisition ID, yes, it controls the parent orders identifier. But within identifier, there is another type that we add for sequence. And that's only added for the individual service requests that are part of a certain group. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as in depending on how many tests are part of that.
So I would, for the sort of computer science reasons that Andy had, would say that an identifier is meant to identify an entity uniquely.
Yeah, that's why I said I hear what Andy's saying, but I'll still put this on the table.
And so now you're saying there is in this order, there's a 1, 2, 3, and in this completely other order, there's a 1, 2, 3. But I might interpret that as saying this order is equal to that order because they both have an identifier of 1. They're the same entity.
Yeah, but how our system works on it is it works in combination with the requisition number. So not
Yeah.
just in itself,
Yeah,
because
it's scope in your mind. It's scoped against the requisition ID, but is
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah, I get the idea, because as I was saying that the way we do the rendering or the viewing of the orders, it's all it's all based on your group service request. And then
Yeah.
when you choose, when you get into individual group service request, that's where you see all these numbers, and that's when the sequence becomes relevant, because it is underneath that requisition.
I can understand the mechanic and the way you're using it, but I think it's not a very good pattern to follow. Is the Medicare number, which is an identifier, is it scoped by the request group identifier? I'd say it isn't, but
Yeah.
magically this one that you're describing is, and that's kind of the problem with it. It's like,
Yeah,
we have to now
I
write
get
a
that.
whole lot of weird rules about, oh, this is a special type of identifier and it's scoped by the request thing and it doesn't actually identify any entity. It's actually a sequence number. And that's kind of the problem with it, right? It's
and that's the only place it gets used, right? And
Yep.
so it's such a narrow thing that it's.
Anyway, thanks for that, Heath.
Yeah.
Okay, I know where Michael's going now. For
Yeah, we've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes to go.
Why not just put the vote up and see where we land?
Yeah, I think that's play. If someone wants to make a motion and second it. No.
Well, I'm happy to motion that we add something called display sequence as an extension to service request for the purpose of carrying the implied sequence as represented on paper.
as an integer.
As an integer.
As a display number, I think. Don't you want to fully qualify it, because
Can it be a decimal?
Well, it will be
Integer.
it will be an integer. It will
Integer.
be an extension type of integer, so it can only be an integer. And in the discussion in chat, it was said that display sequence was better than sequence. So I'm happy to go with display sequence.
I think sequence indicates that the intent as well. That it's not just some random number. It is actually a sequence number. So I think my preference would
I'd add it's a
display
not
sequence.
And I'd add, because they say this in V2, it's a non-negative integer.
Right. So we have display sequence, non-negative integer.
No, it doesn't need to be non-negative.
natural number.
Well, you could say
Because Angus
positive
can't
integer.
order negative numbers, it's not our problem.
Right.
There's no use case for making it negative.
Where we land, we're out of time. So
Yeah, I think we're close enough.
So are we clear on what the motion was? Is display sequence as an integer with an extension? Was there a second? Did someone?
I'm happy to second that, David.
Okay, so let's relaunch that poll. Hopefully you can see a poll. Oh.
Yep.
And those that can't vote, please vote in the comments too. Okay, we give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. So we've got 24 plus 2 in the comments, so 26 affirmative, 1 negative, and 5 abstain.
3 in the comments.
3 in the comments, sorry.
Andy, Steph, and me.
Okay, so that's 27 affirmative, 1 negative, and 5 abstain. Sharing those results. So it's great. We got through a couple of decisions today. I think I jumped too far there. Trying to get back to next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks, where we'll continue on with this, I assume, where we're going to talk to copy 2, my health record, upload consent withdrawal. We'll give an update on pregnancy status. So this will be on Thursday, the 30th of January. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you.